Hello, Leavitt Group agency community. My name is Lisa Nelson. I am the Leavitt Group Vice President of Employee Benefits Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, as well as the HIPAA Privacy Officer. Welcome to the Leavitt Group latest webinar on COVID-19. It keeps going. Mandating the vaccine in light of FDA approval and insurance surcharges. Today, in short, we will answer the question, what should employers consider when implementing a vaccination program now? And what are the considerations if seeking to impose an insurance surcharge? Joining us today to talk about the employment law considerations of mandating a vaccination program is Fisher Phillips, the Leavitt Group preferred partner for any of your employment law needs, including COVID-19 policies and consulting, but much more than that, all of your employment needs. Our gurus of this topic today is Danielle Moore and Darcy Groden. I will let the ladies introduce themselves and cover their topics for vaccination program considerations. Then when the employer hears all of what they have to say and they think, okay, maybe we'd like to implement a vaccination program and next step, consider insurance surcharges. And I will join you then to finish the discussion there. So I'm going to turn it over to Danielle and Darcy to cover your employment law considerations. Ladies.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Well, welcome everybody. We're happy to be here. You know, it's been a long road, this pandemic, and while there was kind of a flurry of activity, you know, those first 6 months, then things were a little bit quiet. Now it's kind of back with a bang with everything vaccine related. Darcy and I are getting calls around the clock with employers wanting to know what to do, what they can do, the pros and cons. And so this topic is particularly timely, especially with Biden's most recent announcement last week. So we're going to go through all of that. Don't hesitate to put questions in the chat box and we'll stay on after as well. With that, Darcy, I'll let you go ahead and start us off. Do you want to screen share or do you want me to? Oh, there she goes.
I should be screen sharing right now. So great. So today's webinar, at least from the employment perspective, is never a dull moment. New developments you need to know regarding the Delta variant and vaccines. So today's roadmap, first we're going to talk about the Delta variant and how we got to here, particularly since prior to the Delta variant, we thought we were actually coming out and seeing the end of the tunnel with COVID-19. We're then going to talk about President Biden's path out of the pandemic. That's the formal name for his program. On the executive orders that he's taking and the actions he's taking. And as part of that, we'll talk about the executive orders and where that fits into his path out of the pandemic. We'll then segue from that into the considerations of mandating vaccines versus incentivizing vaccines, and then your action plan going forward. So first, let's talk about the impact on vaccine and mask mandates that the Delta variant is having. So as I mentioned, we thought we were heading in the right direction and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but the Delta variant has fueled a surge of COVID-19 cases across the nation. And it's leading to new CDC masking guidance, state masking guidance, federal mandates, and there's the specter of further restrictions on the horizon. So employers that Danielle and I are seeing are struggling with how do we operate with the COVID-19 pandemic and with these ever-changing regulations. And our employees who have not yet received the vaccine, are they safe to come into the office? Should they come into the office? What do we do to incentivize the vaccine? Do we want to incentivize the vaccine? And there's a renewed interest in seeing the vaccination rate climb, but a bit of uncertainty on how to achieve that. So in how we got here, the CDC has reversed its May 13th guidance, which is not all that long ago. It was previously that people could go unmasked as long as they were vaccinated. Now the CDC is recommending that people in areas with substantial and high COVID-19 transmission should wear masks indoors, regardless of vaccination status. And as we discussed with the Delta variant, that is a lot of the nation. And the reason for this change is that the Delta variant is highly transmissible and much more than prior vaccine strains. That being said, the majority of severe illnesses are still among the unvaccinated people. We are getting breakthrough cases, but there's still a strong incentive for employers to want their workforce to be vaccinated. California, where Danielle and I are located, has echoed the CDC guidance. Less than a day after the CDC changed course, the California issued new masking guidance for fully vaccinated individuals that's in substantial or high transmission areas. And it recommends universal masking indoors statewide, regardless of vaccination status. And we are seeing more states that are taking California's approach and recommending masking indoors. California also mandated vaccines for healthcare workers, but California is not the only state to have done so. And actually, now the federal government has stepped in as well. And we are going to be seeing local governments and other states likewise issuing vaccine mandates. So additionally, California has ordered all teachers to be vaccinated or submit to regular testing. This was just on August 11th. It was the first in the nation and even had teacher union support. We are seeing other states likewise following this. In California, schools must be in compliance by October 15th, which is just around the corner. And actually in one of the first, the LA Unified County School District has also required all students over the age of 12 to be vaccinated. And it will be interesting to see whether other school districts follow on this as well. So while there are a lot of states who are on the vaccine bandwagon, not all states are pushing as hard for vaccinations to occur. In Florida, for example, starting September 16th, the Florida Department of Health will fine businesses up to $5,000 for requiring customers to provide documentation of vaccine status. Now, while that applies to customers, there's currently no prohibition on requiring employees to be vaccinated. Texas likewise says that you can't require customers to provide proof of vaccination for entry in service, although businesses can still offer other incentives. There is likewise no prohibition on Texas on requiring employees to be vaccinated. So those sort of represent the two ends of the spectrum on the vaccine status, on vaccinations and whether vaccination should be mandated. We're also seeing local municipalities take action to get employees and others vaccinated. So in San Francisco, starting August 20th, residents have to show proof of vaccination for high contact indoor businesses such as gyms, restaurants, bars, and theaters. So this is trying to get people vaccinated by not letting the populace be able to do a lot of fun things if they are not. On the employer side, there's mandating it by requiring all patrons 12 and older to show proof that they're fully vaccinated. Employers also have to ascertain the vaccination status of their employees and require employees to provide proof that they're fully vaccinated by October 13th. So not that far away. And one of the big changes San Francisco is making is that there's no more self-attestation of vaccine status. So previously, employees could just fill out a form saying, yes, I'm vaccinated. Maybe here's a few other details. Take my word for it. San Francisco is getting rid of taking words for it. There's also additional posting requirements and some additional rules for large events. And Santa Clara County, right nearby San Francisco, now requires that all businesses located within the county inquire on the vaccination status of their employees. So there are a lot of things that the states and local governments are doing to incentivize vaccines, to require vaccines, or maybe just not to require vaccines. And so the next question is, how have employers responded? and Danielle.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. So you can see that there are states and government agencies that are on vastly different sides of this issue. It is very, very hot, and people are very focused on one side of the issue or the other. And so what we did as a firm, since we do have thousands of clients, we started pushing surveys out to all of our clients to get a sense of what are employers doing, how are they feeling about the vaccine. We started that at the beginning of the year, and then we did one a couple of months ago, and then we just did another one. And what we've seen is there is this trend towards mandating, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But we just conducted our third of the year. We had about 700 employers who responded. And while only 4% indicated they would mandate or consider a mandate, in the survey, that number jumped in this most recent survey up to 15%. And I'll tell you we're going to do it again in about a month. And I think following the Biden announcement, as well as the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, we're going to see an even further kind of massive jump. I wouldn't be surprised if it flips to a majority of employers are leaning towards mandating. And that's because several of the reasons employers hadn't mandated before is because they were afraid of lawsuits. They didn't feel protected, or that they were required to by the government. And there was a lot of pushback from employees about the FDA approval. So the number of employers opposed to the mandate dropped by 15 points in the past 3 months, but it remains high, about 68%. And about 79% of employers, up from 74, are actively encouraging vaccination instead of mandating. If you'd flip the slide for me, Darcy.
Oh, sorry.
So about 64% of employers who changed their policy did so because of the Delta variant. And other factors that are leading this trend of mandating are some of the following. A quarter view the mandate as serving the greater good. There's the societal impact. Another quarter feel that the law now permits vaccine mandates, with all the different government entities coming out in favor of mandating that Darcy just covered. 16% believe their workforce is now more receptive. 13% report that they want to be able to appeal to their customers or their visitors and keep their business afloat. And then 12% want to see more remote workers spend time at the physical workspace as well. Okay, this is a quick summary of the various industries, so that depending on what your industry, you can kind of look here and see whether you're in one of the industries that are more likely to mandate versus those that are least likely to mandate. And you can see, as you would expect, healthcare, hospitality, education are in your most likely to mandate category, with automotive, manufacturing, some of those others in your least likely to mandate category. So we've also seen increasingly, it seems every day we're getting an announcement from some new business or some business that they are now joining the mandating camp. More than 600 universities and schools have already. And up here on the screen, I put the logos for several businesses that have already announced that they intend to mandate the vaccine, and they have. Some of them offer testing as an alternative. In other words, if you're not vaccinated, you can submit to weekly testing. Many of them do not. It's a mandate, and if employees don't comply with that mandate, they will jeopardize their employment. So it is certainly a growing trend. And there are some challenges with that. Of course, when employers started to mandate, employees began to sue and push back. And we've seen those lawsuits in states like Texas, New Mexico, North Carolina, and California. One of their key arguments is the FDA's approval. In other words, that the employees filed these lawsuits saying that the drug or the vaccine is still experimental. And by mandating that employees engage with this experimental drug, they were violating their personal privacy and health rights. Well, the FDA just approved the Pfizer vaccine on August 23rd. You probably heard about that in the news. And so I suspect that a lot of these lawsuits will be going away. Many of them already have. You should know that every court that has looked at this issue, challenges by employees, have all found in favor of the employer. They've either dismissed the lawsuits or they're up on appeal, but we have yet to see a court that found in favor of the employee's rights. So that, coupled with the CDC and the DOL and the Biden mandate, is all what is leading this trend towards mandating the vaccine amongst employers.
So previously,
with that, I'll let Darcy talk about the new Biden mandate. Go ahead, Darcy.
Yes, so I'll be talking about President Biden's path out of the pandemic. So previously, we've been seeing a lot of these, should vaccines be mandated or not mandated, ultimately at the legal sense being played out at the state and local level, and even individually as to whether people needed to be mandated. That has recently changed. So the path out of the pandemic is actually a 6-pronged national strategy. The one that the prong we are going to be focusing on today is vaccinating the unvaccinated, but it is probable that we are going to be seeing further action at the federal level on these other 6 prongs, and we might be back talking about those and some changes in national laws in the future. So on September 9th, the Biden administration issued 2 executive orders. One mandating vaccines for federal employees, which is probably not what you are all incredibly interested in today, but rather your interest is probably in the one mandating vaccines for federal contractors. So the first question is it all federal contracts? And the answer to that is actually no. The federal contracts that are covered by this executive order are certain procurement contracts, a contract covered by the Service Contract Act, a contract for concessions, and a contract in connection with federal property or lands offering services for federal employees, dependents, or the general public. There are quite a few federal contracts which are not covered. Grants, Indian tribe contracts or contract-like instruments, those with value equal or less than the FAR simplified acquisition threshold, agreements involving employees performing work outside the United States, and subcontracts solely for the provision of products. So the first thing to figure out is whether you even have a contract that is covered by this executive order, because it's possible that you might have federal contracts, but this executive order just is not going to apply to you. That being said, let's assume that you do have a contract or contracts covered by this executive order and you need to comply. So what are the requirements? First of all, federal contractors will be required to follow new vaccine mandate requirements, but it's only effective with contracts with pending solicitations or entered into on or after October 15th, 2021. So we are going to be seeing old contracts grandfathered in where this vaccine mandate does not apply. That being said, there is a lot that we actually do not know. The Safer Federal Workforce Task Force is set to issue guidance by September 24th, 2021. So that's what we really need to be looking for to see how is this going to play out at the individual level and what are we going to need in those contracts. We do know that the contracts are going to need to include a flow down clause. So that means that if you are a contractor with the federal government and you subcontract out part of your contract, your subcontract must include that you're going to comply with this vaccine mandate. It's a bit unclear whether this vaccine mandate is going to apply to remote workers on federal contracts. So hopefully we'll have a better sense of that when we get this guidance issued on September 24th. In addition to the executive orders, the other thing we have coming is a new OSHA emergency temporary standard. It's going to apply to all private employers with more than 100 employees. And it's going to have a 14,000 per violation citation fine. We're not quite sure when this new emergency temporary standard is going to be promulgated. We think it's possible within the next several weeks, but we just don't have a hard deadline yet. We do think it's likely that OSHA is going to give employers 75 days before it starts enforcing the emergency temporary standard. That is based on the amount of time that President Biden has given federal workers to be vaccinated. So this is really a best guess rather than something we know for sure. The other thing is that the emergency temporary standard will only remain in effect for 6 months. At that point, the emergency temporary standard needs to go through the actual rulemaking process in which people can comment and become an actual standard, or it's going to go away. But not all the states are subject to OSHA. You might be in one of the 21 states that has a state plan rather than being under the jurisdiction of OSHA. California happens to be one of those states. That does not mean that you are necessarily not going to have this vaccine mandate coming your way. Once the emergency temporary standard is issued by OSHA, those states then have to adopt the emergency temporary standards themselves, or they have to adopt measures that are just as effective within 15 to 30 days. So we're going to be seeing a lag in terms of the emergency temporary standard being adopted or similar standards being adopted in these 21 states, but it will be coming for those states. So Danielle, I'll shift back to you on mandating the vaccine.
Okay. So with all of that background on where we are and the trend towards mandating, the question that I'm getting on a day-to-day basis is, can I safely mandate? And if so, how do I do that? So can you mandate? Yes, you can, mostly. If you had asked me this question 4 or 5 months ago, I would have said, maybe, maybe not. There's some pros, there's some cons, there's some risks. Now, with the way that the trend's gone and the different government agencies, it is squarely a yes, with certain exceptions for accommodation. So large employers and certain federal contractors, it's not just yes, can you, but it's you will be required to, right? It has flipped the question from can you mandate to can you not mandate, essentially. And for smaller employers, it's still safely a yes, you can mandate with the few exceptions I'm going to talk about, but you're likely not required like the larger employers or the federal contractors are. And the reason that it's a yes is because in addition to the CDC guidance and the trend that we've seen amongst employers, oh, if you can go back, please, Darcy. The EEOC came out in December, way back in December, and then again updated in May, on May 28th, and said employers can require employers to get the COVID-19 vaccine. For employers not subject to a vaccine mandate, you need to consider the employee's duties and the work setting. For example, are they in a position where they are interfacing with the public, or are they sitting in a desk with enclosed walls, right? Those are things that you should consider. But the EEOC has said there's a direct enough threat to other employees where you can require it. The DFEH in California, which is our state version of the EEOC, has followed that guidance as well. Now, when I say mostly, that's because both the EEOC, the DFEH, and even when we finally see Biden's path come out, there is exceptions there for people who need accommodation who can't get the vaccine either because of a medical reason or disability, or because of sincerely held religious beliefs. And over the past couple of weeks, I've started to see a ton of requests from employees saying, I have a religious belief, I can't get the vaccine, I've got a medical issue, I can't get the vaccine. So we're going to talk a little bit too about how you navigate those issues. You can flip the slide, Darcy. Okay. So when the EEOC came out and said that you can require, there's basically two different standards, one being the direct threat, and whether or not somebody who's unvaccinated is a direct threat of substantial harm to other employees. And you have to look at, again, whether or not the employee is interfacing with the public and what those job duties are. If it's not a direct enough threat, then the second standard is a qualification standard, or it must be on an objective basis, historically tied to jobs that are protecting the public safety. So again, that relates back to, are they interfacing with other employees? Are they interfacing with the public, with your customers? If you're going to mandate, it should have one of those components, right? You want to look and make sure that there is that risk. Okay. So if you decide sitting here today, gosh, there's this trend, it seems more and more employers are heading this way, I may be forced to head this way. If I do decide to mandate, how do I do that? So we've tried to put it here in some quick little snippets. And then Darcy's going to follow up and talk to you about what do you do if you are not mandating. If you are not quite ready to go that far and instead you want to incentivize or encourage things to do and think about to incentivize and encourage. So if you are going to mandate, you want to figure out and be thoughtful about the best way to communicate that policy to your employees, including how much notice you're going to give them before you implement, before that mandate happens. It's a really tough market right now in terms of hiring. Employers are really struggling with hiring and keeping folks. And so there is this fear that I'm hearing amongst employers that if they are forced to mandate or they have to mandate and they communicate that to employees, that they're going to lose employees, or they're going to lose applicants. Hopefully the trend and the increasing amount of employers that are mandating gives you some level of comfort, but that is going to be a battle of those two business needs. You also want to consider your logistics, including compensation issues. For example, in many states like California, you will have to pay for the vaccine and their time getting the vaccine as well. So you want to think through those issues. You want to consider how your employees and customers are likely to respond to the policies. So you want to anticipate that pushback. And I am seeing a lot of pushback. I had one client who had an employee who called and said, I can't get the vaccine, I don't believe in it, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, it is our policy that we mandate unless you need an accommodation. And he said, well, I need an accommodation. And the HR professional said, okay, what accommodation do you need? And the employer responded, said, well, what are my choices? And the employer said, well, we accommodate for medical disability needs or for religion. And the employee said, yeah, religion, that's the one, that's what I need. So you're gonna have some of those situations where you suspect maybe it's not a legitimate accommodation, and to some degree you're kind of forced to take their word for it. Now, I do have forms and a process that will help you kind of navigate that if you need assistance with that. But it is going to be an increasing challenge over the next few weeks and over the next few months. But you want to try to anticipate and prepare for that to the extent you can. And some of that's communication with your employees and putting them at ease. And some of that is being ready with a process and some practices to address those issues when they occur. You also want to develop a designated vaccine team or somebody who's charged with thinking through these issues, how you're going to communicate, what you're going to communicate, and how you're going to administer this as well. Okay. And a few other things to think about as you mandate. You want to develop a robust and clear accommodation policy. We talked about that for your disabled or medical needs and your sincerely held religious beliefs. This is just like any other ADA accommodation issue that you have for your employees with disabilities and medical needs. You're going to need to engage in the interactive process, right? You're going to have that one-on-one dialogue with the employee that's individualized and confidential about what their needs are and how you might be able to accommodate that. And remember, you don't have to accommodate if it's an undue hardship, but that's a tough standard, right? You have to show that you truly can't accommodate that person's need. So for example, if it is a hospital and we're talking about a nurse, and that nurse says that they cannot get the vaccine because of a religious need, and that nurse is interfacing with patients, then that would be an undue hardship, and you could have to get creative in your accommodation. Maybe you put that nurse on a leave of absence, or you offer remote work if it's a remote work position. But it is a tough standard, so be careful. Make sure at the same time that you're training your supervisors as well, so that they have some understanding that you have a duty to accommodate. And when they get requests that come directly to them, they say, oh, nope, sorry, we don't do that, and they land you in some trouble or a potential lawsuit. So make sure you're training your supervisors as well. Okay, with that, I'll flip it back over to Darcy to talk about incentivizing and encouraging. I do see a couple questions coming in, so I'll scan those, and as Darcy's wrapping up incentivizing, we'll answer some of those questions.
So we've discussed, Danielle's just discussed mandating the vaccine, but what happens if you choose not to go that route and instead you just want to try to naturally increase your vaccination rates without actually forcing people to actually get the vaccine? There's actually several popular options for this. One is an informational campaign. Another is incentives. There's testing the unvaccinated, additional safety protocols, and vaccine mandate, which we talked about previously. So let's first talk about the informational campaign. A lot of people are flooded with disinformation about the vaccines from social media, disreputable media sources, and just word of mouth. And others just don't have the information. For example, they think they have to pay for the vaccine, even though it's free of charge. And so that disincentivizes them to have to get healthcare that they have to pay for. So addressing specific questions, concerns, or misconceptions among vaccination skeptics may help increase your vaccination rates. Now, I do want to emphasize that this is not going to be 100% effective. This is not going to get every employee to get vaccinated, but it is still a good defense against serious illness, hospitalization. So emphasize that even though the vaccine isn't 100% effective, it's still the best defense against serious illness, hospitalization, and death. This is obviously not going to reach every one of your employees, but if you have people who are on the fence, an informational campaign may be enough to nudge them in the right direction for vaccination. So how do you actually have an informational campaign? Well, the first is you want HR or other company leaders present for informal question and answer sessions. You could invite respective representatives from the medical community or public health officials to provide an in-person or virtual education with the opportunity for employees to be able to ask their questions and get answers to any concerns they might have. You could share informational videos from the CDC or other trusted sources about the vaccines. Or you could conduct a town hall to discuss frequently asked questions. You could obtain the questions anonymously prior, which might address concerns that employees have about speaking up in front of a group, or that their questions may not be popular. Here are some tips we've developed for doing an informational campaign. First is that the employees are not in a vacuum. So it's good to provide materials that can be considered outside of the workplace and discussed with family members, as likely any vaccination decision is going to be a group decision with the family. You can encourage employees to consult their medical providers. You can use language that is appropriate for your employees. This doesn't just mean that your informational campaign is in the language that your employees speak, but that it's at a level that they are comfortable conversing at. So, if you are not a science business with a lot of lab techs or something like that, don't use too much medical or legal jargon, for example. The other thing is that you can pay employees for the time spent at any information sessions. This goes back to, you don't want to have off the clock work concerns and having to pay for employees who get vaccinated. But the other reason is that if you're paying employees for their time, they're more likely to show up. just because they're at least getting something of value, even if they decide they aren't going to go along with the vaccine. And so therefore you might reach out to more individuals that way and just get a higher turnout. The next option is incentivizing the vaccine, even if you don't mandate it. And so the first question to this is, can you incentivize? And you can, but you have to be careful about how you do it. You still have to tailor your incentives so that you provide accommodations for people with medical and religious reasons. So for example, if you are going to provide a gift card for employees who get vaccinated, you need to have some sort of other option for employees with medical or religious exemptions to be able to earn that gift card. If the incentive is too high as well, it could be considered involuntary by the EEOC, making it a wellness program. And Lisa will be talking about incentives under wellness programs later. A de minimis incentive, though, is okay. So a water bottle or a modest gift card, likely $25 or less. And as well, there's potential issues with the regular rate of pay. And by that, I mean having to include it in any overtime calculation rate. And so you just need to be mindful of that as well, and that you include it in the regular rate of pay. So the options for incentivizing vaccines are varied, from cash and gift cards to paid time off, or anything else that you think might strike your employees' fancy. So raffles, vacations, fitness equipment. It's just whatever you think will reach out and be of interest to your employees. And as I discussed, there needs to be alternative mechanisms to earn the incentive for employees who are unable to be vaccinated due to medical or disabilities. And some possible options for that are watching a workplace video about COVID-19 safety, reviewing CDC literature on how to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 in the workforce, or just requiring COVID-19 testing for employees who are vaccinated. If you do COVID-19 testing, though, you have to be careful that you're not doing it at such a rate that it is considered punitive. So if you're making your employee get tested every single day, that might not be so much an incentive as it could be viewed as a punishment and get an employer into trouble. So as you're incentivizing vaccines, just some things to keep in mind. All documents and information about an employee's vaccination status should be maintained confidentially. These need to be contained in the medical record files and not just the general personnel file. You cannot offer incentives to your employees in return for their family members getting vaccinated. So, you know, there's a hard stop line there of you can get your employees vaccinated, but you can't reach beyond that. That being said, you can still offer your employees' family members the opportunity to be vaccinated by your organization or your agent if you take steps to ensure compliance with federal privacy laws. You just can't incentivize it beyond the, well, it's convenient to do it with my employer type situation. So I mentioned briefly about regularly testing the unvaccinated previously and using that as an incentive. So President Biden and a growing number of municipalities are implementing policies requiring all non-vaccinated personnel to be subject to regular testing. But employers can also choose to voluntarily implement that type of testing policy. And the EEOC has made clear that testing is not a medical exam. So you aren't going to run into ADA issues. So if you are going to do regular testing, what do you need to keep in mind? Make sure you comply with all laws by securely storing the information collected from employees, whether electronic, hard file, or both. Determine how often you will test employees who do not provide proof that they have been vaccinated. You want to require frequent enough testing that the system reasonably catches potential outbreaks of COVID-19, but not so frequent that your testing requirement appears punitive in nature. The federal government right now is looking like it's mandating once weekly. And so that might be something to keep in mind, is just following what the federal government mandates are as a de facto, what you can then look to be a fair testing schedule. If you're going to test, though, you need to have a written policy, how frequently you're testing, under what circumstances, what you're paying employees. Your testing protocols must comply with applicable wage and hour laws and expense reimbursement requirements. So not only paying for the employees to be tested, but keep in mind that some states require that you reimburse employees for having to travel to the testing site, and for the test itself, and for the time they spend getting the test. So that can all add up. Time spent should just be treated as compensable time. And you also need to determine how you will handle a positive COVID-19 test in the workplace. So if you have a positive COVID-19 test, in addition to excluding the employee, how will you be contact tracing? Which employees will you be excluding? Are there state laws that require that you exclude certain employees unless they're vaccinated or unless they themselves test negative for COVID-19? You just want to have this all thought out and in your written policy. And you need to have your quarantine and return to work protocols in place, as I mentioned, with clear contact tracing, so that you have all this in place. Now, I discussed this as if this is just one uniform policy that you can roll out company-wide, but there very well may be some state and local nuances that you're going to have to cover here. For example, Cal OSHA has its own emergency temporary standard about what individuals need to be excluded if there's a positive test in the workplace, who needs to be tested if there's a positive test, whether you need to report positive tests to a local public health department. And so it's not just having a company-wide policy that you could potentially roll out nationwide, but also being mindful about what your local state requirements are going to be, and even what your municipality requirements are going to be. And if you're going to provide regular testing rather than vaccination mandate, expect an uptick in requests for accommodation and exemption from testing, in addition to the exemption from vaccinations that people are going to have. You have to accommodate an inability to undergo testing for medical or disability reasons. And so your policy needs to include an accommodation request procedure. The other thing is, whatever new policy you develop, you need to communicate the new policy in a clear and direct manner. Emphasize that the sole purpose of the policy is to maintain a safe workplace. Some employees are going to feel like it's just punishing them for not getting vaccinated, and you need to stay ahead of that narrative and make sure that employees understand that it is just for a safe workplace. And finally, there are some additional safety protocols you can take for your unvaccinated employees. You can renew masking requirements if that's not already mandated. You can restrict business-related travel, and you can have other restrictions that are relevant to your work environment. So that's just going to be thinking about what will make my workplace itself safe. Again, the protocol shouldn't be punitive. Workers who are unvaccinated may claim retaliation if they feel harassed or discriminated against. So you need to be consistent about how you are implementing these protocols, and even consider whether some of them need to apply to your vaccinated employees as well. So I am going to now flip back to Danielle on other considerations relating to vaccines.
Perfect. And before I go into a few other considerations and then wrapping up with an action plan, I want to answer a few of the questions that came out. And Darcy, feel free to chime in as well. So first, several requests for the slides. The slides will be sent out. Lisa put that in the chat box. In case you didn't see that, you will receive a copy of the slides. I had a question about what if an employee has a serious reaction to the vaccine? Is there liability on the employer? It's highly unlikely that there is, even if you're mandating. There is no claim there. Theoretically, an employee could try to file a workers' comp claim potentially. But even then, I think that's a bit of a stretch in terms of passing on the liability from a bad reaction. There's a question about remote employees and whether they will be under the mandate. We don't know yet, but it looks like it. The concept being that the societal good, right? Yes, those remote employees aren't around other employees, but theoretically they are out in the public, and the whole purpose of the mandate is trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So I do think remote employers or employees are likely to be covered, but we'll have to see how things unfold. There's a question about the surcharge, which I'm going to leave for Lisa. She's going to cover that here at the end after we're done. There's a question about whether you have to compensate for the testing and for the time of the testing. And a question about the on-site testing. So I too have heard that the on-site testing is going to be more readily available and at a discount. It depends on your state, but for many states, including our state of California, you do have to pay for the testing as well as the time at taking that test. Tests are free in many places, so you are free to require an employee to go to a free testing site. But then, of course, then they're leaving your work site and you have to pay for the time. So you have to balance those two. There's probably cost savings to be had from having them test on site, but you will need to pay for the testing. The next question, and I'll leave it here and then we'll finish up the additional questions at the end of the program. But the question is can you ask for proof of accommodation? And yes, you can. I have a process and forms that you are welcome to if you reach out to us, but essentially just like any other disability, when you're in the accommodation world, you can request a doctor's note stating that the employee does need an exception from the mandate. So you can request that. In terms of religion, it's a little more difficult. You can request that they attest to the need, that you have them fill out a form saying that they need that accommodation. I've had some employers receive letters or notes from the employee's pastor or religious, representative, but that's not necessarily required. And you can't require that. You in some sense have to take their own attestation for, their word for it. Okay. Darcy, if you'll flip the slide for me. I do see other questions coming in. We won't forget you. We'll finish those up after the next couple slides. Can you ask about vaccination? So a couple other considerations before we wrap the vaccine discussion. Now, remember in the last year, the EEOC issued guidance making it clear that asking about status does not violate ADA. I think most employers now are asking for status. Some are using a self-attestation. Some are requiring to see the proof of the vaccination. There are a whole host of ways to address it, but you can ask. It is safe to ask if you are concerned about that. Okay. And in May, the EUC further clarified that inquiring about vaccination or status or requesting proof is not a disability-related inquiry. So you're not violating employees' privacy rights or rights under the ADA. But you do want to be careful not to ask for any further information. You can ask for the status, you can request proof, but you can't ask, for example, why they didn't get the vaccine, those types of things. And the employee does have the right to decline to answer. Okay, what do you do if an employee refuses? We've touched on this a bit, and you're going to see it more and more. Darcy went through a lot of options for incentivizing, or the carrot. This would be more of the stick portion of it. If there's not an accommodation reason and the employee for political reasons or whatever reasons declines to wear a mask or be vaccinated or disclose their vaccination status, you need to be careful. First, you treat those folks as though they're unvaccinated for purposes of your policies. You can remind them of the purpose of your mandate, as Darcy talked about, and you can ultimately discipline and if you need to terminate. carefully and uniformly. You want to treat employees consistently across the board, and be thoughtful about it. But you may be faced with that situation where you're ultimately forced to discipline or terminate somebody. And you can do that if you need to. So, Darcy, thank you. Okay, in addition to the OSHA standard that Darcy already talked about, I wanted to put up here, OSHA has also put out in August some additional guidance. This is guidance, it's not required, and it largely follows the CDC, but it does give several points that OSHA is recommending that employers follow, like facilitating and encouraging vaccination, which we've been talking about, instructing infected, unvaccinated, and those with symptoms to stay home from work, which hopefully we've all been doing, implementing physical distancing in all common areas where unvaccinated and otherwise at-risk workers may be present. Go ahead, Darcy. And then a few more guidance from OSHA as to things that you should do. Providing no-cost space coverings, educating and training your employees, maintaining ventilation systems, routine cleaning, hopefully things that you've already thought about or in your prevention program. And you're making sure that you stay up to date on as soon as we remain kind of hyper-focused in these weeks on the vaccine. Don't forget the other good protocols and things that you've done and that you've put in place to make sure that the workplace stays safe. Okay, so let's bring up with the action plan and then we'll flip over to questions. So keep an eye out for the OSHA ETS guidance. Watch the Biden path and how that unfolds as well. I'll give you some options for that. Carefully consider your company's needs, your culture, what your position on the vaccine is going to be. I did see one question that I haven't quite got to yet about how to set a policy and a practice in an environment that seems to be changing by the minute. And that's tough. We have seen changes on a consistent basis for the better part of 2 years now. I think that this area of the law has reached a bit of a crescendo, and you can now, given all the guidance and the mandating language out there, finally kind of form a policy, be it mandating if you have to or you want to, or incentivizing and encouraging, and operate from there. You may have to be a bit nimble and change as the world changes. But I do think that you are safe to go ahead and roll out a mandating policy if you want to. Whether you mandate or encourage, make sure you talk to whoever your counsel is first. As you can see from this presentation, there are a lot of pitfalls and potential risks. The Leavitt group, of course, is another excellent resource for you that you can talk to your Leavitt group folks as well. Use solid policies and forms and procedures. Continue to stay up to date. We have available on our website a free resource center that has all kinds of forms and templates that you are welcome to. You can also sign up on our website for alerts. I know the Leavitt group does an amazing job of keeping you all up to date and keeping you alert as to new changes. You're also welcome to ours, of course, as their partner to try to help keep you all safe and up to date. If you flip that, I think we've got, go ahead, one more, Darcy. So there at the bottom of our website, if you want to sign up for those alerts too, that's where you would go to sign up if you do want to receive the Fisher-Phillips alerts as well. With that, I'll either turn it over to you, Lisa, if you want to do that and then circle back with questions, or I'm happy to answer questions now.
Yeah, why don't we take questions while we switch slides?
Okay, perfect.
Right.
Okay, so let me go and see a few questions here. Really popular topic, as you can see. Okay, so I have one here that says, whoops, I just lost it. Okay.
Well, there's one here that says, what will happen if our governor issues an order against the president's order? Which one would we have to follow? And so that's actually a really good question. So at the very sort of theoretical legal level, you follow the federal government over if there's a conflict with the state government. That being said, if there's a conflict, it's likely to end up in court. And so the courts will have the final say on And it's likely to be a little less straightforward than they conflict, and more perhaps the government is overreaching or the government is doing something that they aren't permitted to do. And so then a court will step in and make that call.
And a lot of times when they do that, the court will freeze the issue, the mandate or the rule or whatever is at issue, so that you're not facing two conflicting rules while the court is making its decision. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. So I've got another one that says, don't employees have to prove they are part of a religious organization for religious accommodation? That's tough. They have to attest it. They do have to present you with some kind of proof that there is a religious need, but unfortunately that proof can be their word, their own self attestation. And I can give you an attestation form if you need that, but unfortunately, it is a looser standard than a medical issue where you can request a doctor's note, which is often very frustrating for employers, understandably. Okay. So I have another one here that says, I'm not an expert on vaccines. More keep coming in. I keep losing them. Okay. Let me.
I can read it to you, Danielle.
Okay.
I'm not an expert on vaccines. I can't conduct a Q&A. We don't have the will to mandate, and I expect we'd lose a lot of valuable employees, namely law enforcement. I appreciate your suggestions, and I'm still not sure how to reach these individuals.
Yeah, you know, I think that it's just a tough issue, right? We're in uncharted waters here. And we've done our best today to give you some tools, some ammo to decide where you want your organization to sit, and then, you know, how you implement and you attack that. But we're living in a world of gray, right? And you're never going to feel, I don't think any employer in this pandemic world is going to feel 100% comfortable, right? It's just the kind of uncharted waters that we're in. So I do appreciate that. You're always welcome to reach out to us directly, and we're happy to talk through the specific needs for your business. Because every business is different.
Okay, and the final question that's come in is the requirement to provide 2021 COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave will end on September 30th. How do employers go about pay? Meaning after, do they have to go without pay or take their own personal vacation days? So once you don't have to provide the supplemental paid sick leave anymore, this just defaults back to paid sick leave or vacation days or PTO. It's possible that depending on how sick they are with COVID-19, this might fall under FMLA. It's possible that there might be an emergency temporary standard or some sort of workers' comp that applies in your state that you have to pay them for excluding themselves from work. But otherwise, just as a general rule, it's just going to fall back into paid sick leave, paid vacation, PTO, or if they have to take time off and they don't have any of those left, unpaid.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll continue to monitor for questions, and we'll stay on after, but otherwise for now, we'll flip it over to Lisa to talk about the last segment of the
Okay. All right. I have one more question for you ladies before I get started. Can the employer refuse to pay the FFCRA, the Families First leave, if the employee does not get vaccinated?
So there are several reasons under Families First for that leave, and the vaccination is only one of them. If for example, it could be to care for themselves or for their loved one who has contracted COVID-19. So there may still be situations where you do still have to pay that, but you don't have to pay the time to get the vaccine if they're not getting the vaccine.
I think that might also, maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, Lisa, but was that also asking if you can just exclude employees from getting benefits under the FFCRA if they aren't vaccinated?
Right, exactly. I think that's what the question is alluding to.
Not across the board. If they fall into another reason, then you would be obligated to provide it. I also think that you want to, because you still have the ability to potentially get some tax credits,
Yeah.
but
okay, thank you. All right, I'll get started. Thank you, Danielle and Darcy, for that really timely and informative, yet still needing more answers presentation that we all fall into right now because things are ever changing, evolving so quickly. I will build upon their discussion by talking about the surcharge and incentive component to your wellness program that is intended to encourage employees to receive the vaccine. So it's a hot topic right now, surcharges. We're hearing it every day, all day long. So as Danielle and Darcy outlined their employment law considerations for vaccine policies, I really want to touch on the rest of it. So as part of your wellness program, you can have that financial incentive we all know about, and it can be a surcharge penalty or an incentive. The nomenclature will really depend on whether you're setting that amount, let's say it's $200, to add to the employee premium contribution due, or whether you are deducting that $200 from the amount due. So legal considerations, both in employee benefits and in employment law, really span multiple regulations and laws, from prohibiting discrimination based on health status and under HIPAA to accommodations like religious or medical that Darcy and Danielle touched on. There's also potential wage and hour standards that they touched on. Then we have HIPAA, we have ACA, we have ADA. Whew. There's a lot to consider here, but we're here to help. So when considering all of these laws, even what may look innocuous, like incentives, like a gift card, is really still setting up a wellness program here. So we really want to discuss those wellness program rules. And then I want to end with the Affordable Care Act, because if you didn't have enough, if you're an applicable large employer, you also have to consider any incentive or surcharge in your calculation of affordability under the ACA. So I will touch on that as well. Well, I won't cover this slide in a lot of details, but as you can see, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Danielle and Darcy laid out all that is available for us now, and there's really much to learn and yet to learn for the Biden vaccination order. And that's because nothing has been written yet. He basically said, this is what I'm going to ask for. And then now all the regulatory agencies are hard at work writing the rules, those answers to all of these questions that we are getting. Some of them we're getting today, some that we are getting just throughout the days since this has happened. So some of these unanswered questions are here reflected on this slide. So things like who is going to pay for this test? I don't know. It's kind of the answer right now, because there is nothing written. And a lot of OSHA and safety requirements, like your PPEs that you had in your workplace, all of those costs were borne by the employer. So there's a possibility that a workplace safety testing issue requirement could be borne by the employer, but there is no rule there yet. There's also a possibility that the insurance health plan could pick up some of the testing costs in some situations. I can imagine definitely for situations where you have a directive from your physician, you have exposure, you have symptoms, where the health plan, which is mandated to pick up COVID testing and treatment costs, will then pick that up. But the question as to whether or not a mandate for workplace safety will then require a plan to pick up those costs, that is not answered right yet. We don't know that answer yet. I'll let you know as soon as we do know. Also, another common question is control group rules, which are those rules that say if you're an employer and you have other entities and you have common ownership, then you are considered an employer counting all of those employees and all of those entities, not just per your little office or your specific entity, but if you're related to others, then you may be roped into a large employer definition by way of that relationship. So is it likely that the Biden order, this 100 employees or more for this Biden order, will use the control group rules? a good guess is likely, and that's because under the Affordable Care Act, they use the control group rules to rope in all of the employers into a large group definition. So likely, but yet undefined. Remote workers, also yet undefined. There's a good guess that remote workers would not have to comply with a mandate vaccine per the Biden order because they are not presenting a grave danger in the workplace and therefore a harm in the workplace, which is what OSHA and these safety standards are concerned with. So unlikely, but yet undefined. So all of this, we're expecting guidance to come out in the coming months where we'll have these answers. So we know now that Darcy and Danielle went over this, that yes, you can apply a surcharge on the unvaccinated. So we answered that question, but by doing so, we're also creating a group health plan wellness program. And this will implicate HIPAA as well as ADA and GINA, which is governed by the employment law side that the other ladies talked about. So this complex grid of intricacies really require us to consider a lot of different rules when we're considering this surcharge and incentive issue. So take a look at the Leavitt group. There's other webinars and tools on the finer details of wellness plans and those specifics. Partner with your Leavitt Group local agency representative, and we'll make sure that we'll get you those details. And of course, you have Fisher Phillips as a resource as well that can help you dive deeper into how to structure a wellness program compliant with all the employment law considerations that they went over. So although we typically think of HIPAA as a privacy law, and it is, it happens to be my favorite one, hip, hip, HIPAA, hooray, I always say. But it also includes these non-discrimination rules as well. And ACA also adopted those rules as well. And this basically says that the plan is prohibited from applying a different premium to different employees based on a health factor. However, we know that if you follow certain rules, these wellness program rules, then you are permitted to do that. So what are those rules? This is the important stuff we need to make sure we're doing in order to do this premium differential to encourage vaccines. So these rules, a lot of you might be familiar with, but I'll go over them again. The participant must be given the opportunity each year to qualify for that surcharge or that reward or surcharge incentive, however it's structured. The maximum reward for a health contingent wellness program, which will include that vaccine incentive, cannot be more than 30% of the total cost of the employee's coverage. That's the employee and employer contribution cost. This, if tied to tobacco, you get that 50% total cost. It used to be that the program has to be reasonably designed to improve health or prevent disease, but the last EEOC proposed rules back in April actually eliminated this requirement. So this may be going away in the near future. So that one, not so important. It must be uniformly available to all. And important here, you must have a reasonable alternative, or in some cases, just a waiver of the activity altogether, because it might be difficult to even have a reasonable alternative. So if the individual cannot get that vaccine, whether through a medical reason or a religious reason, then you have to have a reasonable alternative for them. So depending on how the program is structured, whether you're structuring it as a surcharge, which means paying more, or an incentive paying less, depending how it's structured, you may also, that employee may also be entitled to a refund or credit of any of those surcharges that they paid once up to the point that they actually completed the reasonable alternative. So think about that. It may be easier for you not to do a surcharge kind of situation because of the refund and administratively how that would operate for you. Some reasonable alternatives that you could think about here is reassigning the location of work, modifying the hours to reduce contact with other employees, allowing remote work, or submitting to those weekly tests that the Biden order mentioned. There could be other safety measures that you want to pile on as well, like mask wearing, even if you change the location in the facility to reduce contact, you might do that. And in addition, have a mask. So think about how you can come up with various alternatives to that vaccine mandate, because you are required to. All wellness incentives together must equal that 30% or 50%. So if you're already you've already implemented wellness program incentives or surcharges, let's say for biometric screening, health coaching, annual physicals, walking programs, all of the other ways that we incentivize health in a wellness program. Make sure, I lost my train of thought. All of those ways that we make sure, I just lost my train of thought. my train of thought. Okay, I'll move on. So all wellness incentives, that 30 or 50% must be calculated together. So if you had all of those other incentives, you have to calculate that together. So it's not just an incentive for vaccination, you get 30%. It's a total 30%, all of the wellness activities considered. Plan materials describing the terms of the premium differential must disclose the availability of that reasonable alternative standard to qualify for that lower premium. This disclosure must be included in any notice that the individual that says that the individual did not satisfy that wellness standard of, let's say, not smoking or not getting your vaccination or not submitting to weekly tests, all of those requirements. That disclosure must also include contact information for any individual that wants to reach out to obtain an alternative standard, or a statement that says recommendations from the individual's personal physician will be accommodated. So make sure you have this disclosure language in your plan documents and any other notices that you have that include any of the wellness alternatives or terms. I've included here a sample disclosure. Feel free to use this or any version kind of similar to this. So a major question left unanswered here by regulators is also for employers seeking to implement a surcharge feature to their wellness program for vaccinations. They really have to make a call right now on a lot of things because there is a void in guidance. And one of the calls is whether they will institute a surcharge as part of a health contingent wellness plan or a participation only wellness plan. A health contingent wellness program typically will require participants to achieve a specific health goal in order to obtain that reward. A participation only plan, there's no reimbursement or reward that can be contingent upon any health outcome. Rather, it just merely is participating. So you're only doing some activity. It doesn't require that you actually obtain some results. If the surcharge based on vaccination status is considered health contingent, which most people, including myself, I think it probably will be, there would be that limit of 30% of the total cost. So including all of your incentives. So you're going to be limited at that 30%. So that's likely where it is to fall, but not definitive yet. So for example, if the company's full cost of premiums for employee only is $500 a month, then the surcharge would be limited to 30%, which would be $150. Now, remember that 30% here, this example is only talking about vaccination. I'm talking about all incentives too. So when I'm saying 30%, $150, that's for all of your wellness incentives that month. But if it's considered participation only, wellness program, the surcharges really would be unlimited. That's because employees who do not get vaccinated wouldn't be participating and could be subject to a surcharge beyond that 30%. The distinction here is important. If you're seeking this large surcharge option that may go over that 30%, you've got to be comfortable with an interpretation that says this is a participation only versus a health contingent wellness program. The DOL regulations nor the courts have provided any guidance as to what this would be considered. Good faith compliance, as I like to say, good faith interpretation for these rules will be important. The penalty for non-compliance here would be an excise tax of $100 per day per affected individual. These cases could be brought by regulators or by the plan participants. To give you an example of a fairly recent DOL enforcement of these wellness plan rules, they're really focusing heavily on HIPAA's requirement for health contingent wellness programs. And so the example is a DOL lawsuit against an employer that alleged that that employer violated HIPAA's requirements by imposing a tobacco surcharge without providing a reasonable alternative standard. Under this settlement, the employer agreed to pay $145,000 and some change to the employees who paid that tobacco surcharge. In addition, they agreed to pay a penalty to the government of approximately $15,000. So this is happening out there. It is something we want to pay attention to, that we are actually implementing those reasonable alternative standards. You want to check out the Leavitt Group and Fisher-Phillip article I linked here for your reading, which will give you additional details. So I added some things to think about in the last few slides, and a lot of it Darcy and Danielle did cover. Things like, don't forget your HIPAA privacy rules. If you are collecting, whether it's an attestation, a proof of your vaccination card, or just an affirmation that you're vaccinated or not, however it goes, just remember confidentiality rules will apply. When we're talking about health plan obtained information, then HIPAA privacy rules will apply quite strictly about how you're going to obtain, store, and share that information. So make sure you're fully versed in HIPAA. And the good news here is I happen to be a HIPAA nerd, and so I have tons of resources for you. Everything, literally everything you're going to need to be compliant with HIPAA, we have for you at the Leavitt Group. So make sure you reach out to your Leavitt Group representative so that we can get that for you. In addition to the other things to think about that Danielle and Darcy mentioned in their portion of the presentation, I just wanted to add one other thing that is on this slide, and that is your cafeteria plan rules. If you are intending to roll out a vaccination mandate program as part of your wellness plan, if you're going to do this mid-year and before the start of your next plan year, which a lot of employers are doing, you should really check your plan documents that are governing your health and welfare plan to see if that you can even make mid-year changes. And most documents say that you can. And then second to that, whether contribution amounts can be changed. Hopefully your documents do say that. Moreover, if the incentives results in a substantial change to the cost of the plan to those that remain unvaccinated, the plan documents may actually give those employees the option to disenroll from the health plan or to elect a more affordable health plan. So effectively an open enrollment, if you will, for those affected if there's a substantial change in the cost of the plan. Don't forget, if you're making any changes to the plan, including your wellness plan component, you may need to update those plan documents, including the SBC, your summary of benefits and coverage. If the SBC includes any of the cost components that may come into play from these incentives or surcharge from your wellness program, you will have to update the SBC too. So all plan documents, we're talking about RAP, we're talking about potentially notices, we're talking about your SPD, and we're talking about your SBC. All of these plan documents will likely need to be updated if you do not have this vaccination component part of your wellness program today. You have 60 days from the date of adoption to update the plan documents, except for the SBC, which requires 60 days prior notice to the effective date of the change. Some groups have a hard time meeting that 60-day prior. Do the best that you can. A lot is changing. There's a little bit of flexibility considering the vagueness of the rules, if you will, but do the best that you can. If you want more information on COVID-19, we have a resource center at the Leavitt Group, and I've linked that here for you on the slide. Danielle and Darcy talked a lot about some of these considerations, but I did want to add a few more. COBRA. So there's a couple of things I want to say here. COBRA, if you are terminating, if you are terminating because your employee did not get vaccinated per your vaccination policy, they're still eligible for COBRA. So keep that in mind. Arpa subsidies, it should be irrelevant right about now because it's literally what we're 2 weeks away from the end of the Arpa subsidy period. So hopefully that would not be a consideration, but it is possible for ARPA purposes that a terminated employee can sometimes be considered involuntary. Keep that in mind. It's probably moot. But on the COBRA premium side, you cannot increase the COBRA premium for those participants less than 12 months in advance. So you have to let them know what the cost of that plan is 12 months in advance. And in a lot of cases, you cannot change that rate within that 12 months. So you want to look at your plan documents and see what it says for COBRA, see what your COBRA notices say. You want them to say that if there is any cost increases to the plan that cannot be avoided, which there are not often, but it does come about where they have to make increases to the cost and it cannot be avoided mid-year. We want it to say that so we can increase the premium here, but you want to pay close attention that you might not be able to for COBRA participants. If you have any employees with a collective bargaining unit, so your unions, make sure you're looking at those agreements. They may also limit your ability to change your wellness program and increase premiums. Danielle and Darcy talked about some wage and hour considerations where the plan is not an ERISA plan, which is state and local governments or a church plan. Those state laws may limit garnishment of wages more than a specific percentage. So you'll want to make sure you're consulting with an employment attorney who's familiar with your state, who can tell you if you're not in a ERISA plan, if you have to worry about any wage and hour laws in those states. So all of these things to think about and consider and determine what features would fit for your company, cultures, and beliefs. And if this is not enough, I'm going to move on to the Affordable Care Act. So under the Affordable Care Act, also called the ACA, an applicable large employer is subject to an employer shared responsibility rule, which we also call the employer mandate. The ACA requires these ALEs, as we call them, to offer minimum, affordable, minimum essential, minimum value health coverage to the full-time employees. Affordability this year is 9.83% of the premium. Next year, it drops to 9.61%. Make sure you've read the Leavitt Group article about this new update. I've linked it here on your page. So in determining affordability, the ALE cannot require the full-time employee to pay more than that 9.61% of their income next year. And you're using a safe harbor. It can be their W-2 wages, it can be federal poverty level, or it can be their hourly rate that you're using to determine what's 9.61% of what is affordable. So you're going to do 9.61% of, let's say, their W-2 wages to determine where the premium must fall in order to be affordable for those employees. If you are a Leavitt Group client and need more information on the Affordable Care Act and ALEs, including an affordability calculator where we're making this real easy for you, you can contact me, you guessed it, or your Leavitt Group rep, so that we can provide you all the details you need to be compliant with the Affordable Care Act. Now, for ACA purposes, if the incentive is structured as an increased premium, the employer must treat all employees as if they failed to get vaccinated and were required to pay that increased amount for purposes of determining affordability, regardless of whether or not that was the case. So if your employee did get vaccinated, that doesn't matter. You're still adding this incentive to the affordability, to that premium dollar amount to determine if it's affordable. And so how you're structuring the wellness program and incentive, if you're an ALE, will be important to your calculation for affordability. So you want to make sure you're working with your Leavitt Group rep, using the tools that we have for you to determine where your affordability will actually fall. So if you have, for instance, an employer could design it as a penalty, as a deductible increase rather than a premium increase, this would not impact affordability. It would impact minimum value. So deductible changes versus premium changes. Okay, so one, we're taking from the, we're either adding a differential to the premium, or we're changing the deductible cost. So choose which one works for you. As an ALE, you might want to choose the deductible cost because this will get you further with that affordability calculation. Similarly, because the ACA only requires the employer offer one affordable plan, the employer could also link that incentive only to its higher cost benefit options, leaving untouched those lower cost affordable options. So keep in mind that you really only need one. So when you're messing with your calculations, just as long as you have one that's affordable, you will be compliant. I have here some surcharge examples, largely repetitive because Darcy and Danielle also covered them. So I just wanted to leave you with this. There's a lot that is changing. Make sure you have signed up for the Fisher Phillips and the Leavitt Group news sites. This is how we reach out to you on a regular basis because things are changing really quick. Make sure that you have contacted your Leavitt Group rep if you are not subscribed to that news site, and they will make sure that you are subscribed. And make sure you just reach out to us. We are a resource for you. I really consider myself an extension of your team. We are here to help you with this. You're not in it alone. So a lot of changes in this ever evolving regulatory world. And while we know that there may be a lot of remaining questions, we hope that you now have enough to get the conversation going within your own organization. I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Danielle and Darcy for their continued support with the Leavitt Group. We're going to take some more questions, but before I do, we're going to be sending out this presentation as well as the slides, the recording, and supplemental materials, as well as a guide and a calculator. If you have any additional questions related to the employment law portion, please reach out to Danielle and Darcy. They are here as a resource for you. And if you have any related to the insurance or wellness side, feel free to reach out to your Leavitt Group representative who will rope me in, and we'll make sure that we got you covered. All right, let's see what other questions we have.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. That was wonderful. I see one here that says, if we have to follow the OSHA mandate for vaccines or be tested weekly, can we charge the employee for the price of these in-office tests? Not gouging them, just charging them for the cost of the tests the employer will have to pay, as the testing is only based on their not getting the vaccine. So I've been getting this question a lot lately. Lisa, Darcy, feel free to chime in. it's unclear, but there's enough out there that our recommendation is no, you've got to pay for the testing. It's still for your benefit so that they can work. Yes, they may be choosing not to get the vaccine, but they also could be unable to get the vaccine because of a disability or for a religious need. So the current advice in this kind of unclear environment is that you have to pay for it. Okay.
Okay, another question says, if an employee feels sick and we have them tested that same day and the test comes back negative, can they then return to work the next day without having to quarantine? So the answer to this is probably yes, but it's going to depend on what your local public health order says.
Yeah.
So,
It's so, as Darcy said earlier, there's 21 states that have their own OSHA, right? And so depending on what state and what local municipality you're in, that answer is going to vary. But I agree that it's likely yes, depending on where you are.
yeah, although they might still have to be out sick for whatever their cold is. So they might be taking just normal paid sick time at that point.
Okay. The requirement to provide, I think is that our last question? That may be our last question.
I see one that says, after the supplement pay ends on September 30th, will the employers be responsible for paying for a COVID test?
Well, again, we talked about this a bit during the presentation, but there is free testing now. You can require employees go to the free testing. If you're going to require that they attend it on site, or that they have some particular testing facility or some kind of test that is either physically there at a specific location, then you're gonna have to pay for it. I think Lisa, that might be it for the day.
Yeah, I think so. I was just looking.
Well, one just came in that says, if it is a large employer and is required to mandate a vaccine, how would they have an incentive? So if I don't know if this is touching on benefits as well, but in terms of if you are mandating the vaccine, then you don't need to have an incentive. The incentives are more to incentivize people who, when you don't have a vaccine mandate, but you want to encourage vaccines.
Yeah, I think that's right. If you're a large employer over 100, you're going to need to mandate. It looks like you're going to need to mandate or be potentially subject to the fines, right?
Okay, let's see.
The person clarified they meant in terms of the incentive or surcharge for cost of premium. So I am going to bump that over to Lisa.
I'm sorry, I think I missed that. I was
Yeah, that's okay, Lisa. The question is, in terms of the surcharge, if it is a large employer that's required to mandate a vaccine, how would they have that surcharge and incentive?
You're not required to have the surcharge incentive. So that's just an option to encourage your employees to actually get the vaccine or comply with your vaccination program. So there's no mandate there. That is an option, but it is very common that a wellness program has such features. So the government mandating this feature is not equal to mandating a surcharge or incentive. What it'll look like in this mandate, such as, okay, they're going to mandate it. Does that mean you're submitting reports to the federal government? Does that mean if you're not complying, kind of similar to the ACA, are they going to penalize you? We don't know any of that yet because this literally happened on Thursday and there's no rules yet. So we're waiting to see, but it is likely unrelated in essence. We're just talking about because this is a common way to get that that vaccination done. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're asking if you have to mandate already, then why, how would that incentivize, the surcharge? It's a good point. Right, it is if you're already mandating. I do think that, there's still value in incentivizing in a whole host of ways, but
And there are also going to be smaller employers that
right.
sort of fly under the radar in terms of having to mandate a vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much on behalf of Darcy and I and Fisher Phillips. Thank you to Lisa and to the Leavitt group. It's always a joy to be with you and to help keep you all up to date. And we're happy to do it. And don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions after the program.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ladies, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.